around their way. A lot of people have the same ordinances. I did this presentation, in, I thought it was hurricane, isn't it? Sorry. A few years ago with the American Planning Association, and part of my research on this was looking at the ordinances around there, and I found that they're basically all the same. So it would be cool if counties took on a leadership role with some of the ordinance work that needs to be done. They're all, let's see, in my head I'm saying one different word, but let's see, in non-compliance with the state law. Anyway, so we're going to talk a little bit about conditional uses. Let me just start off with a quick question. What's a permitted use? What's on the card? Yeah, what's a permitted use? Give an example of a permitted use. Single family home. There you go. Residential zone, single family home. Easy. Just meet the setback, the height, and maybe that's about it, and you're done. Right? Building code. Okay. Conditional use. A little different. Right? What happens there?
Lottery is based on specific conditions.
Okay. Where do you get those conditions?
It should be in your ordinance.
Wow. See, this message is starting to get around. Written in your ordinance, right? Okay. When I grew up in zoning, we did all that stuff by the seat of our pants. Okay. And nobody lets us do that anymore. In case you don't know that, the state has said no. You got to find something in your code that relates to the condition that you want to impose. Okay. It's got to be something written. All right. So here's what I'd like to do. Talk a little bit about how the state law changed 12 years ago, okay? Not yesterday, not this legislative session, but 12 years ago. Talk about some typical ordinances that I've seen here and there. Talk about some possible language changes you might consider. If I asked you ahead of time to bring your code and you could kind of mark it up and stuff, you could say, go home with your marked up code. But instead, we're going to use our volunteer county right here and talk about the box elder ordinance. Going to pull it up and see what you think. Okay? After we go through the principles. All right. State law. Taking a big stab at this a long time ago at this point. Why do you think they did that? What do we know about our legislature? Anything? How many of those folks?
Developers.
Developers. Are there real estate people too?
Yes.
Yeah. Attorneys? Uh-oh. Yeah. There's a lot of folks up there that have a big stake in development, okay? So, I really think they got tired of going and hearing these horror stories of these conditional use hearings that went on and on forever, for months, and then they got turned down, right? Or the commission in Utah County wanted blue doors on all the buildings, and the commission in Salt Lake County wanted red doors. Something like that. They got upset about things like that. It started to happen. So, they added all this language, and this is from the state law. Okay, land use ordinance may include conditional uses. Do you have to have conditional uses?
No.
You don't even have to have a zoning ordinance, in fact, which, of course, we have on the west end of Box Elder County also, right? No zoning. Okay, compliance with standards set forth. Does that mean written? It does. You got to have it somewhere in your ordinance, okay? Shall be approved. Shall be approved. Okay, when I first started doing these, and I kind of did this a couple times now, but in a zone, if we didn't want the massage parlor over there, but we were okay with it over there, we just deny that, right? That's all we did. It's easy. Nobody took you to court in those days. That says shall be approved. if reasonable conditions can be applied, okay, to mitigate the reasonably anticipated detrimental effects. Detrimental effects, what's that? What's that? Yeah. Impacts, negative impacts, whatever it might be. Reasonably anticipated means that you could expect that there might be these problems that show up, okay? Got to have your applicable standards. And then there's this other word in here, mitigate. What does that mean? I think that's my next slide. Let's see. Oh, yeah. Lessen. Does that mean, it doesn't mean eliminate, okay? And I think that's really important. Can't quite think through what that would be for the massage parlors. You have to do fewer massages. I don't know. More legal massages. I don't know. Nevertheless, that's what it means. So if you have a use that you think it's going to be a problem, it's a conditional use, and you want to put some conditions on it, and they can mitigate, lessen those impacts, then what happens? They shall be approved. Okay, all right. Okay, so does that call on us to have a really good list of possible conditions that you might place on uses? It sure does. Because if it's not in the ordinance, you don't get to do it. Yeah.
So when something like that happens and you recognize you need an ordinance in place, is it a problem to add one after you've had,
So whatever the applicant's applied under and is vested under, that's what they get to work under.
Really
Okay.
loud and you say, hey, we're going to put a noise ordinance in place.
Yeah, it's like I mentioned before that after that meeting where you go, man, we need that little change, get it done. You can't maybe apply it to this guy, but the next guy you can. I was in a Salt Lake County meeting when we had a apartment complex come in, and right now I can't remember exactly what the condition was, but our planning commission wanted to impose a condition that was not in the ordinances. Has anybody heard of Bruce Baird? So he was representing the developer. He stood up and said, "Do you have that in your code somewhere?" And I remember going, "Nope, not that I'm aware of." I said, "Well, you can't do that." And we took away that condition for the time being. So it's just one way to look at these things, okay? So this part is important too. So you got a conditional use ordinance, right? A couple pages, maybe 3-4 pages, who knows? The fixing of that chapter implies looking at your lists, okay? Your use lists throughout the rest of your zones. Because there's going to be some where, right? There's going to be somewhere, they just don't belong in that zone, okay? Or you might look back and say, I did all of these conditional uses for massage parlor, and we never could come up with any conditions other than maybe hours of operation. Why do we need to have that as a conditional use and have a big hearing, everybody come out and say, what they're going to do? Stuff like that. So think about some of these uses as you clean up the conditional use chapter. It demands really that you look at your permitted and conditional uses. Okay. I got that one example there of home occupations, which usually in a residential zone, those are conditional use, right? So you're having some kind of hearing usually, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Public hearing. Everybody around the neighborhood comes in and says, you can't do that. They're going to have something. People come to the house and run over my kid, right? That's the stuff you hear. And yet you have it listed as a conditional use, and usually you have about 10 standards already in there for your home occupations anyway, right? So So what's the point? If you actually know what those issues are, do you need to have that hearing? There's an argument against that, which is transparency. Okay, everybody's heard that word, right? Government's got to be transparent. There are some that would argue that you're transparent when you're putting the ordinance together, okay? When you have that hearing on what should happen in a conditional use, or excuse me, a use like a home occupation, you're having that hearing describing those conditions you're going to have, those standards you're going to apply. That's the time for transparency. There are others that kind of feel like anytime something new happens in town, you got to have a hearing. And that's the transparent world. But there's a lot of those hearings that are just a problem to wade through, right? And if you can avoid some of that, state law now allows you to do that. Okay. So let's talk about processing. I didn't stick around for the video there, but everybody got this administrative thing? Nope? Okay, so two kinds of decisions that planning commissions and commissions get involved in. One where you're making policy, so like changing a zone for an application, doing your general plan, creating new policies, actually changing a zoning ordinance is a legislative thing, all right? Once you got those laws in place and you're actually using them, that's called administrative. And a conditional use is an administrative part of our role and responsibility. So we have to follow whatever our ordinance says. That's basically all that means, right? Not creating something new, some new piece to your ordinances. You are using your ordinances. So, look at that. Almost every place I've been, everybody mails out to everybody and their brother and sister, and they was in Bluffdale not long ago, and they do 1,000 feet. Okay, they mail out 1,000 feet. They have big lots, but they mail out that far. So every time they have a hearing, they have tons of people coming, which is an interesting thing. Staff can process conditional uses if you want. They designate staff as the land use authority, okay? And I think you're going to run over my kid, which is what public clamoring usually is. It's not part of that decision, okay? You're looking for facts. You're looking for solid information that maybe we didn't know about, maybe an irrigation line that nobody knew was there, whatever it might be. But you're not looking for, I don't like it. Okay? Lots of options here. Planning Commission, you have a role to suggest what option you want to take on process. Okay? So this is something you want to have a conversation about. We want to keep doing things the way we've been doing them or change. We have the option. Okay, so I'm going to throw a few typicals at you. Things that I've seen here and there. All right? So, here we go. Typical. And for a few minutes, we're just going to talk what I see out there versus what should be out there. Okay? Typical. Land use that because of its unique characteristics or potential impact on our county or surrounding neighbors or adjacent land uses or environment, but which may be suitable and desirable only in certain locations in that zoning district due to conditions and circumstances peculiar to that location and or upon certain conditions which make the uses suitable and or only if such uses are designed, laid out and constructed on the proposed site in a particular manner. Is that all one sentence? Yeah, I think it is. I guess I don't know why we write like that sometimes, but we do. This is kind of that works there, but may not work everywhere kind of a conversation, right? So, state legislature really has said any use that's in the zone belongs in the zone, okay? Which is a different way of looking at it than what we've talked about a long time ago, all right? We really were okay with denying stuff the same use in a particular zone, but that's just not the case anymore. That's a very typical statement, okay? So here's some things to think about. Principles. You want to go back and start working on your conditional use chapter. First, they're all compatible in that zone, okay? You can't say, I wonder if they're compatible. You put them in there, they are compatible, okay? That's the assumption. Shall be approved. Yeah, you might be able to deny something here and there, but that's going to be incredibly rare and a very high standard to try and deny, because all I got to really do is be able to mitigate, right? Reduce the impacts. Okay, this word discretion. Really, the legislature is telling us that discretion is part of the legislative process, but not part of the administrative process, okay? So, we don't really have discretion to just say no, okay? The vagueness, that's an interesting thing, and I read that top one and try to read it a few times before I really got it all. But trying to be really clear about what we're saying in our ordinances has become incredibly important. This phrase that is in just about every one of them promotes the health, safety, convenience, and general welfare of the present and future inhabitants of our county. That's a nice phrase, but does it mean the same thing to everybody? So those are some interesting typicals there. Okay. Just to show you how they're generally laid out. Usually you have a purpose, and you have something about procedure, how are you going about these conditional uses. You're going to have something about how you approve them, which is basically where you ought to have some standards. Standards is an interesting word. That's the word they use in the legislature. Nobody has said so far that you actually have to have a technical standard for every one of these potential conditions you might put up there. I wouldn't be surprised if that's not far away.
Well, I'm just thinking, why isn't there?
Why isn't there?
Yeah, you could save a whole lot of time if you just sat down and wrote up all your mitigating
Yeah.
factors in advance.
Yeah. So some folks have tried to do that. That is really a tougher deal than it sounds like. Yep, it is.
Okay.
But let me give you one example, and I'll just use the massage parlor one for a minute. They don't call them parlors anymore, do they? Maybe you want to do hours of operation, okay? Maybe you want to say, whoa, they're located next to that bar over there, and we don't want them after 10 o'clock or something. I don't know. Actually had that one in Mill Creek, as a matter of fact. It was a big discussion about, ooh, this doesn't seem like this works together. So we have hours of operation as a standard, okay? But what does that really mean? It doesn't mean anything until you actually say what that time interval is going to be. So that's the kind of stuff that's kind of harder. I mean, you could have a standard that says nobody's open after 10 o'clock at night, and you'd be done with that issue, right? But you might have 7-Eleven wants to be open until 1. You might have a bar that wants to be open until 1. You might have a variety pack there that you want to use more of a range and then kind of zero in on it as you have that use come in. Some people really think you can do the whole thing with standards and you have 0 conditional uses, okay? Everything's a permitted use, and you've just got a huge array of fairly technical standards. Can it be done? I think the answer is yes. Is it hard? Yes. Okay? All right. So standards are in there. Have something about duration. You know, sometimes you get uses that come in, they get an application approved, and then they don't show up really to get any work done for 3 or 4 years. You've got to talk about that kind of stuff. When you revoke conditional use, and how do you make amendments once they're there and they make some changes to their site plan, to their use, okay? So these are going to be things that you see typically in ordinances. Purpose. We talked about that already. Procedures. You fill out an application. Hopefully you fill it out pretty completely. You pay some fees. You're going to have a public hearing with the planning commission. Sometimes that's whether the zoning administrator really wants to do that or not. Sometimes it goes to the planning commission first, and then they have another hearing later on, just to decide if they're going to have a hearing, kind of a thing. And sometimes there's a hearing with the county commission too. So that's kind of typical. Okay, we're going to have some kind of hearing at the planning commission. Maybe it gets recommended up to the county commission, or maybe it stays with them for that decision if, in your ordinance, they have been designated as the land use authority to make that decision, right? Okay. Here's another one. So this is actually some of the information from Salt Lake County. So they've got a little bit of a list here. This is how they go through it. And I'll just say to you, do you think that covers everything and anything? How about this one? Is this one really nice and clear? You think you have to have clarity in the standards to apply the standards? Yeah. Okay. So, under environmental, there's probably, 10 things you should maybe have listed? I wanted to throw this in. When Sean was talking about the cannabis, isn't it marijuana? Anyway, cannabis places. I was just reading something not too long ago about, maybe that was in the Planning magazine, but at these grow facilities, which are usually indoors, it gets to be quite a smell around them. That's not burning, I hope, of any kind, but it's actually just the plant itself has a fairly big smell. So they were suggesting odor control. So maybe you have to, under environmental, you have to have odor listed somewhere there. And the other thing they were listing was, or they're sort of saying was a problem, was break-ins. And it wasn't so much break-ins to steal pot, which is what my first reaction was. It's actually because, the pot organizations, they're having trouble with the banks because it's illegal federally, right? So the banks won't really do all the holding the money and all that kind of stuff, not very easily. And so they're having a lot of money on site, which I guess some folks are aware of. So it may be a little bit of a police issue that you might want to include in some of these things. And by the by, 2 communities I'm working in are both destined to have a grow facility, which is indoors in an enclosed building, and that would be Heber and Mill Creek, all things. So anyway, just interesting. Something to think about. Okay, here's some typical language for duration. As long as the owner is the owner. You think that's the case? Think that's the way that works? A lot of our zoning stuff runs through the land, right? So, but we see this, okay? Expiration. You get a year or 2 if no activity. You think you need to define what activity means? What is work? They have to do a foundation, or they have to rub the site? What do they have to do? I don't know, something. And then if they don't follow the conditions, then they're out of luck in some manner. Okay, denial. Some of the ordinances I looked at, there's like 2 or 3 pages that tell us how you deny a conditional use. And let's just go back to that state law for a minute. That shall be approved part is pretty important. So denial's not a big part of this. All right? We got that nice vague statement about general welfare. I just think it can be denied because it's not meeting our neighborhood characteristics. Even though I threw in some nice little things like mitigate said detrimental effects, but interesting and kind of contradictory stuff there. Okay, and the next couple are sort of funny in my mind anyway. So we're not sure that they're going to actually do what they said they're going to do. How do we assure that? Anybody? Anybody got a way we do that? Got to write it up. So So in West Valley, we always had a little piece of paper at the end of the process that said, here's what your conditions are. You sign it, we sign it, and that little statement about this is a legally whatever document, and probably that's not always true. But anyway, somehow you got to be able to make sure they're going to do everything. And then this one really, like, Johnny, well, that's not you, Johnny. I mean, this Johnny. You didn't do it right last time, so we're not going to let you do it this time. Yeah, I don't think that'll work. It's not permittable under the provision of the code. That just says, well, then you should not have that use in that particular zone, and they never should have come to you. And then you didn't pay your application fees and complete the application. They really shouldn't be going before a planning commission or anybody really until you've got a complete application. So, amendments. So you've got one up that's operating. How do they make some changes if they want to, or evolve a little bit on their site? You might want to have something in there about that. A lot of times that is transferred to the ZA. What's a ZA? Zoning administrator. Yep. Okay. Cool. Okay. Just going to throw a few of these up here just for you to think through. Just some changes to how you might consider the purpose of the conditional use. Okay. And really, basically, I'm saying pull in some of the state law language. All right. Let's not be as creative as we like to be sometimes, and let's really use that. So, talks about it, imposition of conditions based on standards, mitigate reasonably anticipated detrimental effects, which is quite a mouthful. Conditional uses shall be approved, right there, okay? And then require approval by the planning commission. Okay, something about who's actually designated to do that work. Okay, so that's a possible purpose. Completeness, we kind of talked about that a little bit before, but I think it is important with all of your applications that come in. There's some level of completeness that you are assessing as it comes in over the counter, which does include paying your fees. You've got to have these written standards. Maybe you want to have somebody that comes in, they have to meet with staff first, if you have staff. You want to be able to say you can go do site visits. You can do other studies if you need them, like a traffic study, maybe a parking study, whatever it might be. And then, all this about whether you're going to have a hearing or not. And again, I think if you look at your lists and you sort of whittle that down a bit, you may not have as many hearings. And then the planning commission actually can do some more planning. How's that? The mail-out thing is really interesting for me. I sort of still like that, but often we don't ask people the right questions. Okay. When was the last time anybody looked at their mail-out letter? Or even a postcard that you do? It's also automatic now that we just don't get into that. But people come in and they get these cards from us that says we're having a hearing, purpose of to approve, deny, and of course denies in capital letters bolded, or put some conditions on it. Really, you do want to educate the people that are coming in that here's what we want from you. It's facts and information, not just opinions. So that is really worth looking at. I don't think I go 1,000 feet either, but just remember that those are the decisions have to be based on something you have written in your. Sorry.
Say it was 1,000 feet and it was right on the border of another jurisdiction, you would still, if your ordinance said 1,000 feet, you would still have to send those letters out 1,000 feet, even if it is into another jurisdiction, correct?
Yeah, unless you had something in your ordinance said, but not a process.
Yeah.
I think so, yeah. And, from that conversation we just had, wouldn't you want to? That's coordinate with our neighbors, right? Yeah. I think it makes sense. Okay. Starts to get kind of redundant here, sorry. Yeah, this was something that at least I found effective. I think I hit it up a little bit earlier too, but you know, we go into these meetings, we have these hearings, and there's things that just don't seem right in our ordinances, and we don't do anything about it. But you could start keeping a list and maybe do 3 or 4 things at once, you know, fix your ordinance where you think you got problems. Just suggesting that as just a regular way of doing stuff. Okay? The lists, that list is going to be a pretty long list. Okay? Trying to get everything that you can think of. You know, maybe one way to do that is you can just go back, look at the last couple of years worth of conditional use approvals and see what kind of standards you guys apply, what kind of conditions were in there. Do you have those in your ordinance? Bring them back up. When I realized that Salt Lake County wasn't doing any of that, when I was on the planning commission, I got the county secretary lady, planning coordinator, I think she was, to send me all of the old conditional use letters. And I just went through and looked for all the consistent things that were not in the ordinance. It wasn't a hard job. Probably took me an hour. Anyway, worth doing. So this is interesting. Just remember, it does run with the land. You got to define what work is, whatever that is for your community. And sure, these days there's a lot of applicants that run into some kind of financial problem, and you got to have some way for them to get an extension. Okay, give them some more time. Fines, revocation. You just need to have some information about that. Okay, amendments allow for some minor changes. Bigger changes have to go back to the planning commission. There's a few ordinances I've looked at that have temporary conditional uses, which seems kind of contrary to the runs with the land idea. But if you got them, at least describe that awfully well, because we had one in Mill Creek that was a concrete plant, and they gave them a temporary conditional use permit. I think they're still there. Probably 15 years worth. So, I don't know. Some of that stuff doesn't necessarily work. Okay. I got a few examples here, just some ones to think about. Okay. I was down in Price not long ago. What's the name of that county? Carbon. Thank you. Yep, I knew that. But anyway, they had all the subdivisions as conditional uses. Anybody else do that? That was the first time I heard that. I did do this same kind of thing down there in the APA conference, and I tried to look at what's happening around, and I went, oh, I just hadn't seen that. Because, you know, think about this from just a theory standpoint. So you got a subdivision ordinance, right, that governs doing subdivisions. Usually those are 20, 30, I don't know how many pages long, right? They got tons of standards in them. And all kinds of things they have to coordinate too. So what's the point of that? Personally, I can't see why you want to have a hearing on anything like that. Okay, manufactured homes. Oh, it's because they're manufactured homes that we have a conditional use permit. Does that make sense? So are we discriminating against manufactured homes? Well, we probably want them somewhere, but maybe it's a particular zone that doesn't have a lot of other uses in it, right? Not just as a conditional use within the residential zones or something. Group homes. Well, commercial manufacturing. Yeah, there was a time when it just seemed like everything that came in, you wanted it to be conditional use. But you think about commercial manufacturing kind of stuff, there's some stuff that you got to wonder, what is the point of that? Let's even do the cannabis production inside of a building. Okay, you got nice landscaping outside, has a strange smell. But they're inside a building, right? And You define what the building needs to look like in your ordinance, where the parking has to be, what the heights are, materials maybe. You want to do a hearing on a cannabis manufacturing location, interior to the building? Think about it. So I'm trying to say that some of these uses, these things were like taboo uses. Well, of course, that's a new one, but the massage parlor one we talked about, tattoo, pawn shops, I don't know, some others, but they're all taboo kind of things, right? They all became conditional uses. But really, what are their impacts? That's what you gotta look at. Let's think about. Okay, group homes, love those. Anybody had a group home conditional use hearing? Yep. How'd that go?
Actually, mostly okay.
How come?
I think they had a plan and they already had a treatment facility, so it was pretty, and there weren't a lot of neighbors.
Adding on, sort of? Okay.
Kind of.
Okay.
It was an accessory, or it was a neighboring property, but it wasn't, there weren't a lot of neighbors to come out against it or anything like that, so.
Okay. So, you know, federal law kind of trumps this one. Trumps. Anyway, yeah, seems to have a different connotation these days. But, so really, I'd suggest to you, since you can't really deny those, that's one that ought to be a permitted use, folks. Those hearings, at least the ones that I've been to, horrible, okay? And an awful lot of discriminatory stuff discussed that, you know, isn't part of what we do. Okay, yeah, I talked about that one already. Okay, and I think I've talked about that. Let's see. Yeah. So, and that last part really is saying, come up with a big list as a minimum. You know, if you think you might want to apply it someday, you've got to have that in your ordinance somewhere. You may not have to have a super technical kind of a standard, but you at least got to say you got it there. Okay. Just for fun, Alex is going to pull up Box Elder County, and we're going to just take a quick look because they volunteered before they heard all this. Just going to take a quick look at their ordinance.